I was paid $20 to ruin a blind date, yet the millionaire CEO fell in love with me. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought a simple decision could spiral my life into something so unexpected. My name is Alec Rose, and the story I'm about to tell you, it feels surreal even to me. I still remember that morning, the sunlight streaming softly through my apartment window, the hum of the city outside, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Life had been simple for me. I had a steady job, a few close friends, and routines that kept me comfortable. I liked it that way. Safe. Predictable. But that day, everything shifted, almost like the universe was quietly testing me in a way I couldn't have seen coming. It started with a message. Just a simple text. "Would you do a small favor for $20? It read. At first I laughed. $20? That's barely enough for my lunch. I was used to odd little jobs to make extra cash, but the request made me pause. The message went on, explaining the task. I was supposed to ruin a blind date. That was it. Make it awkward, nothing major, just sabotage it a little, it said. I remember staring at the screen for what felt like forever. Something about it felt off, yet thrilling at the same time. I told myself it was harmless. It was only $20 and no one would really get hurt, right? So I agreed. I told myself it was just a tiny favor, a harmless experiment, something I could do and laugh about later. But the second I stepped out of my apartment and held that little envelope with $20 inside, a wave of unease swept over me. My heart pounded as I walked the familiar streets toward the cafe. Each step felt heavier than the last, like my feet knew this wasn't just a casual task. I kept thinking, it's just a blind date. How complicated could it be? I didn't realize then how wrong I was. When I entered the cafe, I saw him. And just like that, my carefully built plan began to crumble. He wasn't like anyone I had ever met. There was an air about him, calm, confident, yet approachable. His presence filled the room without even trying. I felt my chest tighten, my hands shake slightly as I sat down across from him. The envelope remained hidden in my purse, but the weight of it felt heavier than ever. I forced a smile, telling myself I could do this. Just keep your composure, Alec. Just a small act, nothing more. The conversation started casually, just polite small talk. But the more he spoke, the more I realized this wouldn't be simple. His words, his tone, the way he listened, it was different. Genuine, attentive, caring. I could feel myself drawn into a world I wasn't prepared for. A world where my little plans suddenly seemed cruel and impossible. Every laugh we shared chipped away at the resolve I thought I had. My mind raced. How could something so harmless turn into such a moral dilemma? How could $20 lead me into feelings I hadn't expected? I tried to focus on the task, telling myself I had to follow through. I repeated it in my head like a mantra. Just make it awkward. Just pretend. But nothing felt right. I could see in his eyes a warmth I hadn't anticipated, a kind of openness that made my heart twist in ways I didn't understand. Panic began to creep in. Could he sense my intentions? Could he see the lie hidden behind my smile? Every instinct screamed that I should stop. Yet the moment had a strange hold over me, like time itself had slowed down, leaving us suspended in this fragile bubble of tension and uncertainty. Then it happened. A small gesture, an unintended slip, something that revealed a bit too much. I froze as his gaze shifted, sharp and questioning. My stomach flipped. I had never felt so exposed in my life. How could he read me like that? Did he know? Was this the moment that would unravel everything I had tried to control? The cafe seemed suddenly larger. The naugtat, wizzy around us, fading into nothingness as our eyes locked. Fear, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name, hope, perhaps, rushed through me all at once. Every word he spoke, every subtle smile, pushed me further into a corner I hadn't expected. I felt trapped by my own choices, a tiny lie turning into something far more complex than I could have imagined. And yet, despite the panic, despite the guilt, there was a strange pull, an irresistible tension between what I had planned and what my heart was now feeling. I was no longer the one in control. The situation had taken on a life of its own, one that demanded honesty, courage, and vulnerability I didn't know I possessed. As I sat there, frozen between fear and fascination, the cafe door opened again. Another person entered, someone who could change everything in an instant. My heart pounded faster. This tiny act, this $20 favor, was no longer just about money or mischief. It had grown into a story that challenged every decision I thought I had made. A story of connection, consequence, and unexpected emotion. My plan had spiraled beyond my control, and I had no idea how it would end. I remember thinking, in that moment, that life could change in a heartbeat. One choice, one decision, one small action, and everything could be completely different. And as I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, I realized that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. This was the beginning of a story I could never have imagined. A story that would test my heart, my conscience, and my understanding of what it meant to connect with someone in a way that was both terrifying and beautiful. And so, that was the day it all began. A small favor, $20, and a blind date that was supposed to be meaningless. But life had other plans. It had begun a journey for me that would sweep me off balance, challenge everything I believed about right and wrong, and lead me to emotions I had never felt before. I couldn't know it then, but every step from that moment forward would change me, and everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the choices we make in life. I couldn't stop thinking about him long after I left the cafe. Every detail replayed in my mind. The way he had smiled, the way his eyes seemed to see right through me, even the subtle tilt of his head when he laughed at something I had said. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a blind date, just a random encounter. But something inside me refused to let it go. My heart felt tangled in knots I didn't understand, and the guilt from what I had been asked to do clung to me like a shadow. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment, the $20 envelope lying untouched on the table. I stared at it, wondering how such a small thing could carry so much weight. I had gone in thinking this would be harmless, a quick task for a little cash, but now it felt like I was holding a spark that could ignite something far bigger than I was prepared for. I realized then that the world was more complicated than I had ever allowed myself to see, and I was standing at the edge of it, unsure whether to step back or move forward. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but every message I received, every call from a friend, seemed to pull me back to that cafe. And then, unexpectedly, I heard from him. A simple text, almost casual, but it made my heart stop. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. Can we meet again? My hands shook as I read it, and 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Did he know? Could he sense what I had really been there for? Or was this entirely unexpected for him too? When I agreed to meet him again, I felt a strange mix of excitement and terror. The second encounter was different. Somehow heavier, more loaded with meaning. Each word we exchanged felt like it carried a weight beyond its meaning. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew me in despite the warning bells in my head. Every laugh, every glance, every casual touch of his hand over the table made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and about what I was allowed to feel. It was during that second meeting that I realized just how complicated this all had become. The plan I had been given, the tiny favor, the sabotage, the $20, was no longer relevant. Nothing about this was simple anymore. The more I tried to maintain distance, the closer I felt pulled to him. And the more I realized that the tiny choice I had made, the one that seemed meaningless at first, had set off a chain reaction that I could not stop. My conscience, my heart, and my own sense of morality were all in conflict, tearing me in every direction at once. I remember one moment clearly. We were sitting across from each other, our hands barely touching as we reached for our drinks, and I felt a jolt of something I couldn't name. Fear? Desire? Guilt? All of it. All at once. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet so alive. I wanted to pull away, to hide, to run back to the comfort of my ordinary, predictable life. But I couldn't. Something inside me demanded that I face what I had started, that I confront the feelings, the choices, the consequences, and the man in front of me who had unknowingly become a part of all of it. And then, of course, the unexpected happened. He began to share details about his own life, his struggles, his doubts, his fears, and I found myself listening, completely captivated. I realized that this wasn't just about me or the little trick I had been asked to do. There were layers to every person, hidden truths and vulnerabilities that we all carried, and suddenly, my little world of black and white morality felt impossibly small. The $20 favor, the plan, the idea that I could just ruin something for money, all of it seemed childish, almost cruel, in the face of the reality sitting before me. But just as I allowed myself to breathe, just as I began to imagine that maybe honesty, courage, and heart could somehow exist in the middle of this mess, life reminded me of how fragile everything really was. A comment from him, a question that pierced the core of my heart, made me realize that one wrong word, one slip, could undo everything. The tension was unbearable. My thoughts raced. How much could I reveal without destroying this fragile connection? How much could I hide without betraying the truth of who I was? Every second stretched, thick and heavy, and I felt as if my entire world balanced on the edge of a knife. Then, just when I thought I might finally relax, fate threw another curveball. Someone from his world, someone I had not expected, entered the cafe. The moment froze in time. My stomach lurched, my mind raced, and I felt the weight of everything crashing down on me. The tiny favor, the plan, the emotions that had taken root. It all suddenly felt so precarious, so fragile. One glance, one mistake, one word from the wrong person, and everything could collapse. I felt panic, guilt, and fear mix into a cocktail that threatened to consume me. And yet, in the midst of all that chaos, there was something else, something I couldn't ignore. The truth of my feelings, the depth of my own heart, the courage that had been quietly growing inside me over these past few days. I realized that no amount of planning, no tiny $20 favor, no small attempt at sabotage could erase what had already begun. The chain reaction had started, and it would not stop. My choices, my honesty, and my willingness to face the truth had become the most important things in my life, even more than the fear of what might happen if I failed. By the time we parted that day, I felt exhausted, terrified, and more alive than I had ever been. I walked home slowly, thinking about every word, every glance, every possibility that had opened up in front of me. I knew deep down that the story was far from over. That tiny favor, that seemingly meaningless $20, had changed everything, and I couldn't go back. My heart, my conscience, and the chain of events I had set in motion were now moving forward with a momentum I could not stop. I realized then that life is unpredictable, that a single decision, even one that seems small, can ripple outward in ways we can't imagine. That fear, guilt, and excitement can all exist at the same time, and that love, unexpected, complicated, and terrifying, can appear when we least expect it. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I understood something important. Nothing in my life would ever feel ordinary again. Everything had shifted, everything had changed, and I had been pulled into a story far bigger than I could have ever planned for. The next few days felt like walking on a wire stretched over a canyon. Every thought, every action seemed magnified, and I couldn't escape the memory of him. The way he looked at me, the way he laughed, the way he made me feel seen in a way no one ever had. My mind kept replaying that second meeting over and over, twisting and turning every detail, searching for some sign, some clue of what I should do next. I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Whatever had started was no longer something I could control from a distance. When I saw him again, I felt my chest tighten the moment he smiled at me. That smile, warm and genuine, carried an unexpected weight, like it was holding a question I wasn't ready to answer. The small trick, the $20 favor, felt heavier than ever, pressing down on my conscience. I had come here thinking I could play a role, pretend, and walk away untouched. But life doesn't work like that. The deeper I got, the more impossible it became to hide my feelings or my fear. We sat across from each other, the same table as before, and I realized that nothing would be the same. The way he looked at me wasn't just casual curiosity, it was interest, concern, connection. And every word he spoke pulled me further into a world I wasn't prepared for. My heart was caught in a tug-of-war between fear and desire, guilt and hope. I wanted to tell him everything, yet I was terrified of what it would do if I did. Could he understand why I was there in the first place? Would he forgive the truth? Or would it shatter everything we had started to build in these few fleeting encounters? As our conversation continued, I felt the tension rise with each passing second. I laughed when I shouldn't have, spoke words I hadn't intended, and tried to mask the anxiety curling in my stomach. Every glance, every subtle gesture, carried more weight than it had any right to. I had never been so aware of the stakes in a simple conversation. And yet, at the same time, there was something intoxicating in the uncertainty. A thrill that made my heart race and my mind spin. Then, the unexpected happened. A comment he made, a small, innocent observation, pierced through my carefully constructed defenses. I felt my face heat up, my hands shake, and I realized in that instant that the plan I had been given, the tiny favor that had seemed harmless, was now impossible to follow. My emotions were tangled in knots I couldn't undo. Fear, guilt, and excitement collided in ways I couldn't separate. And every instinct screamed at me that the truth, no matter how terrifying, could no longer be hidden. But before I could decide what to do, fate intervened again. Someone entered the cafe, a figure from his world, someone whose presence changed everything. I froze. My stomach lurched. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to navigate this new complication without losing control, without exposing more than I was ready to. The small, calculated steps I had been taking suddenly felt meaningless. Every decision I made now carried enormous consequences. I felt trapped, vulnerable, and more alive than I had ever been in my life. Despite the panic, something inside me stirred. A quiet determination, a recognition that I could no longer run from what had begun. This wasn't just a blind date anymore. This was no longer about $20 or a harmless favor. This was about honesty, courage, and facing emotions I had been avoiding my whole life. And for the first time, I realized that the only way forward was to embrace the truth, no matter how messy, no matter how scary. I remember sitting there, my hands trembling slightly, as I finally allowed myself to feel everything at once. The guilt from the task I had been asked to do, the fear of his reaction, the weight of the choices I had made, and impossibly, the pull of something deeper, something real, something that terrified me because it was entirely unplanned. I had set out to disrupt, to play a role, to earn a little money, and instead, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of human emotion I couldn't ignore. Time seemed to stretch, as though every second was holding its breath. I watched him, trying to measure his expression, hoping, fearing, praying for a sign that he might understand, that he might forgive, that he might care about the real me, the me behind the plan, the me behind the lie. And then, in a quiet moment, our eyes met, and I felt something shift. Something delicate, fragile, and terrifying. For a fleeting instant, it was as if everything hung in the balance. One word, one gesture, one revelation could change everything. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. My mind raced, and yet, in the midst of it all, I found myself laughing, talking, and connecting in a way that felt real and undeniable. I had never experienced anything like it. Every heartbeat, every glance, every word was charged with electricity, a reminder that life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. And I realized, with the mixture of awe and terror, that I had crossed a line I could never go back from. As we parted that day, I walked home slowly, my mind spinning with what had happened. The $20 favor, the plan, the small act that had seemed inconsequential. It had grown into something larger than I could have ever imagined. The story was no longer about money or mischief. It was about choices, honesty, courage, and the unpredictable ways life forces us to confront ourselves and others. I understood, finally, that the path ahead would be messy, emotional, and completely uncharted. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of hope. Life had thrown me into a story I didn't choose. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew that I couldn't hide, couldn't run, and couldn't ignore the emotions that had taken hold of me. Whatever came, I was ready to face it. That was the day I realized that even the smallest choices can ripple through our lives in ways we cannot predict. That one simple decision, one seemingly harmless favor, could change everything. and that sometimes the moments we fear most are the ones that shape us the most. The story I had been pulled into was far from over, and I had no idea how it would end. But I knew one thing with certainty: nothing would ever feel ordinary again. I can still feel that moment as clearly as if it were happening right now. My chest was tight, my hands trembling slightly, and my mind was spinning faster than I could keep up with. Everything I had felt, everything I had hidden, everything I had tried to control, it all came crashing down in an instant. That tiny favor, the $20 task that had seemed harmless at first, had led me straight to this impossible, terrifying, breathtaking point. He leaned closer across the table, and I felt my heart lurch. There was no casual distance anymore. Every word, every movement carried weight. I wanted to look away, to hide, to escape the intensity of what was happening, but I couldn't. My emotions were a storm, swirling so violently that I felt like I could drown in them. And then it happened. The unthinkable. My hand brushed against his by accident. Just a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through both of us. The world seemed to freeze. His eyes widened slightly, searching mine, and in that instant, I realized there was no hiding the truth any longer. My mind raced. Could he see what I had come here for in the first place? Could he sense the plan, the lie, the tiny favor that had brought me into his life? I felt panic rise in my chest. Every heartbeat screamed that one wrong word, one slip, could destroy everything. I wanted to explain, to confess, to pour out everything. But the fear of losing him, of losing this connection that had grown so unexpectedly, made me freeze. And yet, at the same time, there was a pull, a strange and undeniable force, urging me to take the leap, to risk everything for honesty, for truth, for something real. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, yet carried a weight that made my chest tighten. Alec, I feel like there's something you're not telling me. Something important. My heart skipped a beat. That one sentence held the power to unravel everything, and I could feel the tension crackling between us like lightning. I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing in 1,000 directions. But deep down, I knew he had seen past my carefully constructed mask. He had sensed the lie, even before I did. For a moment, the room fell silent. I could hear my own breathing, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Time seemed to stretch into eternity. I felt fear, guilt, shame, and a strange, fragile hope all at once. I realized then that no matter what I did next, nothing could be undone. I could either confess and risk losing everything, or continue the charade and destroy any chance at something genuine. My mind screamed at me to run, but my heart whispered a different answer. I took a shaky breath and decided. I told him everything. The plan, the $20, the task I had been given, the guilt I had carried. It all spilled out in a rush of words, each sentence heavier than the last. I expected anger, disgust, rejection, maybe even laughter at the absurdity of it all. But what happened instead shook me more than anything I could have imagined. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just listened. And in that quiet, tense space, I saw something shift in his eyes. It was understanding, compassion, a recognition that even small mistakes could happen to good people, and that intentions, complex, messy, human intentions, could not always be measured by actions alone. I felt a weight lift slightly from my chest, replaced by a tremor of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel. And then he did something I will never forget. He reached across the table and gently held my hand, not in accusation, not in mockery, but in solidarity. in connection, in something entirely real. In that moment, I realized that everything I had feared, the exposure, the judgment, the consequences, was no longer as terrifying as the thought of not being honest, of not risking everything for truth. I saw in him a kind of patience and acceptance I had never encountered before, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I felt emotions I hadn't named yet. Fear, yes, but also trust, desire, relief, and an unspoken promise of something that could grow if we allowed it. But the turning point wasn't just in what he did. It was in me. I understood that my life, my choices, my courage, or lack of fit, had led me here. That even the smallest acts, even something as seemingly insignificant as a $20 favor, could set off a chain of events that changed everything. I realized I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't undo the way my heart had opened, the way my conscience had shifted, or the way life had forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for far too long. And then the world reminded me, as it always does, that nothing is simple. A sudden distraction, a familiar voice, a glance from someone unexpected, something that could topple the delicate balance we had just begun to build, pulled me back into the edge of a knife tension. My stomach churned, my thoughts raced, but I held my ground, gripping his hand tightly, silently promising myself that I would not let fear dictate my next move. The hours that followed felt like a whirlwind. We talked, laughed, shared more than either of us expected, and yet, beneath every smile, there was a current of tension, an awareness that life had brought us together in a way neither of us could fully understand. The tiny favor, the plan, the $20, it no longer mattered. What mattered was the honesty, the connection, and the raw, unpredictable way that life could surprise you when you least expected it. By the time I left, my legs felt weak, my heart racing, and my mind spinning with what had just happened. I had faced the worst of my fear, the weight of my guilt, and the unpredictability of life all at once. And I had survived, changed, and opened to something I had never imagined could exist in the middle of a plan gone wrong. That tiny act, that small favor, had led me to the most intense, terrifying, and beautiful moment of my life. And as I walked home, I knew one thing with certainty. Life had just shown me that the smallest choices could lead to the most profound consequences, and that courage, true, honest courage, could transform even the most impossible situations. I had faced the climax of my story, and though the path ahead was still unknown, I felt alive in a way I never had before. Walking home that evening, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. My chest was still racing from everything that had happened, but beneath the adrenaline, there was a quiet, profound sense of clarity. The tiny favor, the $20, the plan I had been asked to carry out, it all seemed almost trivial now. What mattered wasn't the money or the mischief. It was the truth I had faced, the courage I had found, and the unexpected connection that had grown in the chaos of it all. I kept replaying the moments in my head, the way he had listened, the way he had held my hand, the understanding in his eyes when I finally told him the truth. It wasn't just relief I felt. It was a deep, humbling realization that people could surprise you, that even in moments where fear and guilt seem overwhelming, honesty and courage can open doors you never imagined. I had thought I was entering a simple, harmless task, but I ended up learning something far greater about life, love, and the choices that define us. The days that followed were different. I noticed things in myself I hadn't before, the way I approached decisions, the way I weighed consequences, the way I allowed myself to feel fully without running away. I realized that even small actions, seemingly insignificant, could ripple through life in ways we never anticipate. That tiny favor had revealed to me the hidden strength I carried and the ability to confront uncomfortable truths. And while I was grateful for the lessons, I also knew I would never forget the fear, the tension, and the heart-pounding uncertainty of that day. But it wasn't just a personal revelation. In reflecting on the experience, I saw how easily society manipulates moments, how small pressures or expectations can push people into actions they might not take otherwise. That tiny act, the one I had initially believed harmless, was a microcosm of larger injustices, the subtle ways people are judged, manipulated, and underestimated in everyday life. I understood that my experience, as intense and personal as it had been, was connected to a broader truth about the human experience, the importance of integrity, empathy, and courage in navigating a world full of invisible pressures and unseen expectations. And yet, despite the gravity of those lessons, there was hope. I had faced my fear. I had confronted the consequences of my choices. I had opened my heart to someone in a way that felt real, raw, and honest. And through it all, I had discovered that even the most unexpected, terrifying situations could lead to growth, understanding, and connection. That day, I had been tested, and I had survived. Not just survived, but emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the fragile, beautiful complexity of human emotion. Looking back, I realized that life often gives us moments we are unprepared for, forcing us to make choices we never imagined. We are tested in ways that feel impossible, that challenge our morality, our courage, and our hearts. And yet, in those moments, we discover what we are truly capable of. I discovered that love and trust, though fragile and terrifying, are also transformative. That honesty, even when it feels like it could destroy everything, has the power to heal, to connect, and to change lives. The story of that blind date, the tiny favor, the plan, the $20, will stay with me forever. It is more than just a story about a trick or a scheme. It is about life, choices, courage, and the unexpected ways the human heart can surprise us. It is about fear, yes, but also hope. It is about guilt, yes, but also redemption. It is about moments we cannot control, but can learn from. Moments that shape us, define us, and teach us about who we truly are. As I reflect on it all, I can't help but wonder how many of our own lives are shaped by tiny decisions, by moments we think are insignificant, by choice, as we try to avoid facing. How often do we allow fear to dictate our actions, when courage might lead us to something extraordinary? That day taught me that even in our smallest, most mundane moments, we hold the power to create ripples that change everything. And perhaps, if we are brave enough to face our fears and embrace our truths, those ripples can lead us to love, understanding, and a deeper connection to the world around us. Even now, I think back to him, to that day, and to everything that followed. I see the lesson in every moment, the reminder that life is unpredictable, that honesty is invaluable, and that the human heart, fragile and complex as it is, can endure, transform, and triumph in ways we often cannot anticipate. The $20 favor may have started it all, but it ended with something far greater. A story of courage, truth, and the undeniable power of taking responsibility for our choices, no matter how small or terrifying they seem. So here I am, sharing this story with you. Not because it's perfect, not because it has a simple ending, but because it is real. Because it is messy, emotional, and human. Because it reminds us that every choice matters, every moment counts, and even the smallest actions can change the course of our lives. And as you think about this story, I leave you with a question. What would you do if faced with a choice that seemed small, but had the power to change everything? Would you take the risk? Would you face the truth? Would you be brave enough to see what might happen if you followed your heart, even when it terrified you?